How about you be useful? Get me some food.
Quiet, traitor.
That's Captain Traitor. Insubordinate plebe.
UCC 5576.
That depends. Who's asking? Rick sent us.
Finally, we land on another landmark episode for me coming out of Season 1 for this series. The cameos aside, there's a rich thematic message in this episode that makes for a mature viewing experience and adds a level of distinction to this that puts it above the rest in my opinion. And that message is trust.
Trust me, I'm the doctor.
When you boil this episode down, you start to realise what the point of it is and how it sets up the two-part season finale. It provides us with a great insight as to how the Empire was initially established in its military and confirms what became of the Specialist clones following Order 66. This, for me, is honestly one of the most refined and well-written episodes to come from the Star Wars animation department, and once I've explained what happens, I'll explain why. We open on a clone being chased through the forests of Darrow as he's being pursued by mastiffs and their owners. While this trooper is being pursued, he leaves a tracker near his location and puts out a beacon for rescue. He's quickly caught, and it's later revealed that the beacon was put out for Rex, who contacts the Batchers for their support as he's preoccupied and can't go to retrieve him right now. Hunter is hesitant to accept this, but Omega and Echo push for this as they are the best chance that this trooper has. Hunter agrees to at least scope out the land before attempting to retrieve him. Once they arrive on Darrow, Wrecker and Omega are instructed to remain on the Marauder while the rest go off to investigate. As they follow the trails, Tech reveals that the mountain has become an Imperial base where they bear witness to newly armoured troopers. Hunter determines that this is an impossible mission and it poses too much of a risk to them, but Echo quickly presses him and explains that they risked more than that in the heat of war to rescue him from Skako Minor, and believes that this mission is a worthy use of their talents. They agree and press forward and venture into the base, where they discover the identity of the new troopers being labelled as TKs, and are steadily being phased in as the clones become obsolete. Echo locates the clone and they move in to get him. We cut to the very trooper in question, who gives us a clue as to who he is with a little chuckle, and when the Batchers find him, he introduces, or reintroduces himself to us at home as being Gregor. I'll remind you of who he is in a bit, but for now, the crew move forward to escape, with Tech setting off the internal alarms, assuming that he could bypass them to relocate the TKs. Gregor tells them that this won't work and they make a break for the lift to see if they can get out through the top level. As they arrive, they are greeted by an assortment of commandos and TKs led by Scorch of Delta Squad. The crew quickly descend back into the base while they try and figure a way out. As they're pursued by Scorch, he catches up to them and shoots Gregor in the chest but is taken down by the rest of the gang. And Tech quickly determines their exit by using the ventilation system. They get word to Wrecker and Omega, who come to get them, but not before the commandos catch up and intercept them in the vents. Wrecker lays down cover fire while they escape, but only Gregor and Tech manage to get on board first. As they're chased through the skies, they evade the fighters and go back for Echo and Hunter. Echo manages to make it on board, but enemy fire causes the Marauder to sway, and Hunter makes a desperate jump for it, but is unable to stick the landing and descends to the ground below.
God fucking damn it!
He does everything he can to limit the impact of the fall and makes it to land with a few small bruises, but is greeted by Scorch and his men, who capture him as Hunter instructs the crew to get out of here. A little while after, we close on the arrival of Crosshair, who's here to detain Hunter, and says that he was hoping for the whole squad, but he'll do. Firstly, I actually gave this episode a round of applause when it came out, for firstly being a dramatic improvement over the last installment, but secondly for being so deeply filled in context, nods and Easter eggs, and not to mention the two huge cameos. I mentioned in the opening that there was a richer thematic message to this episode and that it would set the crew up for what comes next, and that message was trust. We see throughout this episode that Gregor trusts Rex with the response to the beacon, then Rex trusts the Batchers to take on the responsibility where he can't, then Echo shares the sentiment and enforces the trust that they can have in Rex. This then leads into Hunter having to trust Echo in pursuing this mission, then the crew entrusting Tech to get him out of there, and then lastly Hunter trusting the crew to come back and get him. This leads into the finale neatly, as Hunter has had to lead this group throughout the entire season and now has to rely on them to make the executive decisions to rescue him, and pray that they don't get hurt in the process. The loyalty and faith that he has in them will be tested now and becomes a talking point against Crosshair in the finale itself. This is the make or break moment for the squad, as they have to exercise their understanding of planning and utilise their knowledge in an effort to take Hunter back from the clutches of the Empire, a force of which they've been trying to avoid this whole time. What I didn't realise till now though is that this episode calls back on various moments throughout the season too, and reminds you of what they've learned. Hunter's distrust of the clones was questioned when he met Hauser, due to the faith that he had in his men, so he learned to approach Gregor differently, as he had the assurance from Rex, but also not every clone is the same. Omega mentioned to Hera that Tech won't let her fly the ship without understanding how the Marauder functions, which she proves to have clearly learnt here by piloting the damn thing. Echo is finally validated in his desire to do more despite the end result in helping those that need it, and this acts as a beautiful prelude to what will become of Echo by the midpoint break of Season 2. Tech is able to emphasise his flying capabilities, which we scratched the surface of back in the Ryloth duology. Then lastly, Hunter is starting to pay attention to the desires of his crew, and needs to learn to let them do things for themselves on occasion, because the slip up here came because he was trying to protect his squad above anything else. Hunter has been adamant on avoiding the Empire throughout the season, and that has essentially left them unprepared for what they could do or are actually capable of against an army like this, and an army especially that overwhelms you. The ground and aerial assaults generated a chaotic situation, so much so that the TKs killed their own fucking leader. One thing that I'll give the Stormtroopers is that they're ineffectual when it comes to addressing a situation alone, but when they're together, damn are they unrelenting. Moving on, however, the next big talking points are the appearances of Gregor and Scorch. So to draw back on what I said I'd get to earlier, and to provide some context, let me explain Gregor's story. Gregor first appeared in Season 5 of the Clone Wars, being discovered by Colonel Meeber Gascon and D-Squad, where at the time he had amnesia, having crashed on the barren world of Abathar. Gregor was reminded of who he was, and after confronting his captor, who claimed to be giving him a new life, he aided the squad in getting off-world and back to the Republic. The confusing part comes from here, however, in that Gregor was presumably left for dead, as he was caught amongst an explosion of Rhydonium around him, and this was the only time we ever saw him in the Clone Wars. Cut to a little over 15 years later in the timeline and chronological release of these different TV shows, we find that he is with Captain Rex and Commander Wolffe living on a desolate world of Selos in Star Wars Rebels. Gregor is only seen a handful of times throughout Rebels, with him sadly becoming the only casualty in the attempt to remove Imperial occupation over Lothal in the Season 4 finale. So as you can see, there's a lot of missing time and little explanation as to how he survived the explosion on Abathar by the time of Rebels, but as it turns out, he just did.
Oh, how convenient!
He mentions it briefly after getting shot by Scorch, but he doesn't explain how he escaped nor how he knows Rex. I also like in this moment when he mentions being blown up that Echo turns to look at him, likely recalling his moment in Season 3 of the Clone Wars. I'm interested to get a little more behind the story of Gregor and what caused him to derail into such an outlandish and somewhat unstable but lovable personality that he is in Rebels, but only time will tell on that matter. It was interesting to hear what Gregor had experienced under the new regime as an instructor and former commando in his own right. He mentions that he wanted out once he realised what would become of them, and then to hear that he's sort of been sabotaging the training of the TKs implies that that's why they're notoriously bad shots and strategists, which would lead me to believe that many of the clones were doing the same, which is actually quite hilarious.
Comedy.
This was a huge appearance, mainly for the fans of Rebels, and the fact that he's an established trooper in both the Clone Wars and that show, and became a fan favourite quite quickly, but to provide some insights as to how we get from this point to Rebels is as equally as important as the insights we're given here. Then to Scorch. This is honestly for the hardcore fans. Scorch is a member of the well-renowned Delta Squad that received their own video game back in 2005, and would later be brought back into canon, having an appearance during Season 3 of the Clone Wars. His appearance here leaves a lot of potential for Boss, Sev and Fixer to turn up at some point too, but for now, he's the only one to grace our screens, including being featured in the Season 2 trailer for Bad Batch, so we're not done with him just yet. I wonder what his position in all this actually is, as he's the only commando to retain his coloured markings. Even Cody had to don muted tones to his armour post Clone Wars, so what's the difference here? Is Delta Squad even around at this point, or are they elsewhere, operating in a similar fashion as a trainer to him? All fascinating questions that I can only hope we'll receive an answer to, but for now at least, I'm just excited to see him on screen. Then, the last talking point for me is the music. This is clearly done to establish a change of winds for the Empire, by using music directly from the original trilogy from the sequences on the Death Star. Not to mention the halls looking less distinct and more akin to the interior of the Death Star, just made for a sentimental watch, as many fans would have started with A New Hope that kicked off their Star Wars journeys, lest we forget the fanfare motif that Gonki received too. The visuals were brilliant, and the information we were given about the clones and the TKs, which, as it turns out, is Project War Mantle, previously mentioned in the Rogue One novelization and more recently mentioned back in Episode 3 Replacements, is exactly the type of thing that this show needs to dip into occasionally, and thankfully has done, being executed extremely well with the latest episodes from Season 2. Anyway, that's all I've got to talk about with regards to this one. If you have any thoughts on this episode, you know where to drop them. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more down the line, and until next time everybody, take care, and may the Force be with you.